A controversial case. The U.S. government gives its highest profile defense yet of why it's legal to kill U.S. citizens overseas who are deemed a threat to the nation. You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. It's one of the most controversial actions the U.S. government can take, targeting one of its own citizens with lethal force. Under the U.S. president's unprecedented drones program, at least 3 Americans have been killed overseas. Now, Eric Holder, the U.S. Attorney General, has been laying out the legal justification for such action. The most high-profile killing is that of U.S.-born cleric Anwar al-awlaki. He was killed in a drone strike in Yemen in 2011. Prosecutors say he instructed the so-called underwear bomber who tried to blow up a plane flying over Detroit in 2009 and was a leader of al-qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Critics argue al-awlaki was never charged with a crime and never had his day in court, raising questions about whether he got due process under the U.S. Constitution. A number of lawsuits have been filed trying to force the U.S. government to release its precise legal justification. The American Civil Liberties Union has accused the U.S. administration of claiming the authority to kill any American citizen whom the president deems to be an enemy of the state. Holder also said the United States legal authority is not limited to the battlefield and that action would continue to be taken on foreign soil to deal with threats.
The unfortunate reality is that our nation will likely continue to face terrorist threats that at times originate with our own citizens. When such individuals take up arms against this country and join al-qaeda in plotting attacks designed to kill their fellow Americans, there may be only one realistic and appropriate response. We must take steps to stop them in full accordance with the Constitution. We are at war with a stateless enemy, prone to shifting operations from country to country. But the use of force in foreign territory would be consistent with these international legal principles if conducted, for example, with the consent of the nation involved, or after a determination that the nation is unable or unwilling to deal effectively with a threat to the United States.
So how convincing is the U.S. government's legal argument for targeted killings based on a, quote, imminent threat? Are civil rights groups right to be concerned about the parameters of U.S. authority far from any battlefield without judicial review of public scrutiny? I'm joined now from New York by Jameel Jaffer from the American Civil Liberties Union. The ACLU has been working with the al-awlaki family and filed a lawsuit against the U.S. government. I'm also joined by former U.S. State Department spokesperson P.J. Crowley, who stepped down last year, and by law professor at Howard University, Morris Davis. He was also chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay between 2005 and 2007. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
So there we heard Eric Holder, the U.S. Attorney General, saying we are at war with a stateless enemy. So we have a policy where the president can order U.S. citizens killed without charges, without trial, without any kind of judicial process. Morris Davis, is this not a violation not just of the Constitution, but of international law?
I believe it is. I mean, I think what we're sanctioning here is murder. Sending drones overseas where the president has no authority in Yemen. I mean, the president's authority extends to certainly the United States and its territories and possessions. But to authorize, particularly here, a civilian agency, the CIA, to go to Yemen with drones, fire a missile, and kill American citizens is just breathtaking, I think, to a lot of us.
PJ, you spent years standing at that podium there at the State Department, defending the United States and its policies, its style of government, its way of life, etc. Can you defend the United States on this point?
I think I can, and I'm not the lawyer in the room, so I'll defer to my legal colleagues to argue the finer legal points. Certainly, as Eric Holder argued the other day at Northwestern, the authority to use military force passed right after 9/11 has given the United States the legal authority to go wherever it needs to go to eliminate threats to the United States. I think in the case of al-awlaki, he was clearly an operator that came out of the successful interrogation by the FBI of Abdul Muttalib in 2009, 2010. He was clearly seen as an operator. There's no question that he was affiliated with al-qaeda and plotting against the United States. I think that al-awlaki himself, a fair target, and I think this was an appropriate and legal strike. There were, as you pointed out in the intro, 2 other Americans killed in the process of these raids. Those other 2, I think, are far more problematic and raise very difficult legal questions. You had a propagandist who may not be an operator. You had the son of al-awlaki, killed while he was sitting next to presumably another operative. I think Eric Holder's speech after 6 months of earnest debate within the administration is a good first step, but it can't be the last word. There are still a lot of legal questions that need to be answered so that the American people have a clear line, because this is, as Morris said, extraordinary exercise of power by the United States. It's vitally important for the American people to understand where that line is, where somebody's a legitimate military target, and short of that line,
right.
The presumption being that somebody needs to be captured and brought within a civilian justice system.
Okay, let's go to, let me just go to Jameel. I'll get back to you in a moment. Let me just go to Jameel Jaffer in New York. Jameel, we heard the argument there from PJ Crowley justifying these targeted assassinations or targeted killings. What's the counter-argument to that?
Well, I think that there are a few counter-arguments. One is that the authority that the administration is claiming is really sweeping authority. It's not limited to people who present imminent threats in the sense that imminence is usually used. And there are also issues about transparency here. The administration, I think, was right to send the Attorney General out to talk about the program, but it has said far too little about the scope of the program, the decision makers behind it, how the decision is made to add any particular American to a so-called kill list. All of this is still, I think, shrouded in secrecy. And then I think in some ways the most troubling aspect of all of this is that the administration is insisting that its decisions in this area shouldn't be reviewed by any court. So no court has a role to play in setting the standards under which Americans are killed. No court has a role to play in evaluating whether any particular American should be on a kill list. No court has a role to play in evaluating the evidence itself. Really, the administration is just saying, trust us. And that would be troubling, even if this administration were going to be here forever. But even people who, I think, trust the Obama administration should ask themselves, will they trust the next administration? Will they trust the one after that? Because this power that the Obama administration is claiming is going to be available to every future president.
Morris Davis, you wanted to say something?
Just a couple of points that PJ raised. One is that you mentioned the authorization for the use of military force, and this all gets conflated. That we wrap this under the notion this is war in a battlefield and we're fighting the enemy, and we authorized military force. Al-awlaki was killed by the CIA, not by military forces. We have 2 drone programs. We have a military drone program and we have a paramilitary drone program that's not governed by the laws of war and not obliged to follow the Geneva Conventions. And why we have these 2 separate programs, I don't understand. And then also the facts about al-awlaki being well known. Well, I think they generally are, but we know what we know about al-awlaki not because facts were developed in court as they normally are before someone is executed, is from what we've been told. And we were told by the last administration, the last commander-in-chief, that everybody at Guantanamo was the worst of the worst. Right. And we accepted that argument, and it was wrong.
Yeah, good point, PJ. Do the laws of war apply to civilian agencies in the United States government, like the CIA?
There's definitely confusion in the technical legal terms between Title 10 and Title 50, and there are soft spots between those 2. And I think that goes back to what Jaffer was saying, which is, notwithstanding Holder's first speech, there's just a lot more that needs to be discussed here. If we draw a parallel to earlier in the decade, there were revelations of governmental abuse by the media. It led to an earnest debate over issues of surveillance, issues of detention, and so forth. And then since then, there has been a greater codification of best practices, if you would, in terms of this ongoing struggle that establishes a much firmer foundation, and the American people now understand a little bit more about how the government is working on its behalf. I think we have to have the same level of discussion on specifically this case, and so the American people understand where this line is between a military target and a legitimate law enforcement issue as part of this ongoing struggle. So I hope this is the beginning of a debate, but as Jaffer says, there are very many questions that still need to be answered.
But I would disagree that the public is better educated and better understands. If you go back 5 years ago, the majority of the public was opposed to torture and indefinite detention and extrajudicial assassination. And the pendulum has swung now to where a majority of the public now says torture is okay. A majority of the public says targeted assassination of Americans is okay. So in my view, it's a lack of leadership on the Obama administration to let the other side carry the narrative that, you know, these guys are all the worst of the worst and whatever means are necessary to keep us safe are legitimate. But we claim to be, you know, the standard bearer for the rule of law, and we've turned our back on the law. And, you know, right now the public believes that, you know, the president's justified in doing this.
Let's look at some of the political response to what has been going on. Now, while most U.S. politicians praise the Obama administration for killing Anwar al-awlaki, others, such as the Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul, he questioned that decision to kill a U.S. citizen without due process. Let's listen to what he said.
He's an American citizen. He was never tried or charged for any crimes. Nobody knows if he ever killed anybody. We know that he might have been associated with the underwear bomber. But if the American people accept this blindly and casually, that we now have an accepted practice of the president assassinating people who he thinks are bad guys, I think it's sad. I think, what would the people have said about Timothy McVeigh? We didn't assassinate him. They were pretty certain that he had done it. They went and put him through the courts and they executed him. But to start assassinating American citizens without charges, we should think very seriously about this.
Okay, let's go to Jameel Jaffer there in New York. Jameel, this particular issue makes for strange bedfellows. There's you there, and there's Ron Paul.
Well, I think that Ron Paul is exactly right on this one. I think there's an important difference between allegations on the one hand and evidence on the other. That's due process. Due process is the distinction between mere evidence or mere allegations and evidence. And what we've got right now are allegations. And those allegations, even those allegations, go only to one of the 3 citizens who was killed by a drone strike last year. As Mr. Crowley said earlier, there were 2 other citizens killed by U.S. drone strikes last year. One was Samir Khan, who was killed with Anwar al-awlaki, and the other was Anwar al-awlaki's 16-year-old son. And nobody has made the allegation that that 16-year-old boy was engaged in nefarious activity. I think that everybody recognizes he was an innocent bystander, and yet the administration hasn't even formally acknowledged that it was a CIA strike that killed him. And I think that it's a very dangerous and sad thing. I think sad is the right word. Ron Paul used it. It's a sad thing when a U.S. administration is killing its own citizens and refusing even to acknowledge it.
Just, PJ, you did say earlier on that, you know, this is a problematic area where civilians are killed at the same time who may not be involved in any kind of terrorist activity, but nobody is accountable for this.
Well, I think there's a difference between involvement, which I think is clear, and the imminent threat, as Jameel was talking about earlier, that is the predicate, you know, for this kind of action. Right. I mean, to Ron Paul's point, there's a difference between Timothy McVeigh in the United States and someone who is in a known area of conflict. Yemen is an established battlefield, as is Somalia, as is Afghanistan, Pakistan.
You raised an interesting point there, because the FBI Director, Robert Mueller, was asked just yesterday, can this policy apply to U.S. citizens inside the United States? And he said, I don't know. I'm going to have to ask the Justice Department.
I would absolutely think not. I mean, inside the United States, and to the administration's credit, from the legislation passed by Congress, you know, last year, which establishes the presumptive system of justice as being a military justice system versus a civilian justice system. The United States, the Obama administration has laid out criteria which tries to move this back, you know, into the civilian realm when possible. Clearly, anybody charged with terrorism inside the United States, established under the debate, finally settled by the Supreme Court in the Padilla case, that the presumption is an American citizen inside the United States justice will be sought through the civilian justice system. But outside the United States, it is an established battlefield. I think, to me, there's not, except for the citizenship issue, which is a very serious, sobering issue. There's no difference between attacking al-awlaki in Yemen and bombing Tora Bora in 2001, seeking out Osama bin Laden as an established leader of a cell of terrorists who are committed to attacking the United States. I agree with Jameel wholeheartedly.
Yeah, but
the troubling issue to me are the other two citizens. But the bottom line here is we all agree that absolutely the administration has started a conversation. It needs to be more broader. It needs to be more specific. The American people need to have a firm understanding, as Mo was talking about, what we're doing, what the government is doing on our behalf.
Morris Davis, let me ask you this. Does this set a bad precedent, the policies that the United States is adopting here? Because what stops, say, Robert Mugabe sending his thugs to Johannesburg to kill what he believes to people who are a threat to his state, shoots them on the street there, or the Russians send their assassins to the streets of Los Angeles and kill someone that they believe is a dissident who is a threat to the Russian state?
Well, that is the precedent we set by this example. I mean, the one I've really questioned is the Mexicans are certainly at war with narco-terrorists in their country that have killed more people there than we've lost to terrorism here. And certainly with us having shipped thousands of weapons to them through that Fast and Furious program, they could make the argument that we're not really committed to helping them in their war on drugs. So along the border, if they used drones and accidentally killed some American citizens trying to take out one of the narco traffickers, would we say, well, that's just part of the
But what is critical is in the context of Yemen, we know from WikiLeaks that the Yemeni government had approved the operations that we have ongoing in Yemen. So I think that's a critical factor.
But you can't approve murder. And if you start with the premise that killing another human being deliberately is murder unless there's some legal justification, and combatant immunity doesn't apply because the CIA are not combatants, self-defense doesn't apply because there's no immediate threat of death or bodily harm, it's murder. And you can't, even with the Yemeni permission, say it's okay to come murder someone.
And the other thing that as we've seen shortly afterwards, the Yemeni government was not representative of its people.
But I mean, I think the way that warfare has evolved, the CIA is a combatant. It is a full participant in these battlefields, and we need to make adjustments.
But then they're an unlawful combatant. I mean, we prosecuted Omar Khadr for murder for being an unlawful combatant because he didn't wear a uniform. And I haven't seen a CIA uniform.
Okay, let's go to Jameel Jaffer. You wanted to say something earlier on, Jameel.
Well, my point was just about the transparency here.
Okay, let me stop you. Okay, let me stop you right there because we have some information that I just want to put up on the screen here. Now, it's very difficult to confirm how many people have been killed in U.S. drone attacks. The London Bureau of Investigative Journalism has been collating the number of casualties in Afghanistan and Pakistan since Barack Obama took office. And according to their research, including credible eyewitness accounts, 535 civilians died in drone attacks in that period. Of those, 60 are reported to be children and around 20 mourners attending funerals. The report also said Obama has ordered 264 drone attacks, averaging one every 4 days. And before we get to the question, let me look at the response from the president. The U.S. administration has made a point of not speaking about its drones program, but asked in February about the number of casualties that these strikes do create, and if he thinks the attacks are worth it. The U.S. president said this. Let's watch.
I want to make sure that people understand actually drones have not caused a huge number of civilian casualties. For the most part, they have been very precise, precision strikes against al-qaeda and their affiliates. And we are very careful in terms of how it's been applied. So I think that there's this perception somehow that we're just sending in a whole bunch of strikes willy-nilly. This is a targeted, focused effort at people who are on a list of active terrorists who are trying to go in and harm Americans, hit American facilities, American bases, and so on. It is important for everybody to understand that this thing is kept on a very tight leash.
Well, there we heard the U.S. president there, Jameel Jaffer. He said it's targeted, focused effort, these drone stroke attacks. I mean, does it square with those numbers that we've just cited?
I think that's obviously not true. I mean, even if you focus on the U.S. citizens in particular, 2/3 of the U.S. citizens who were killed last year by drone strikes were killed apparently unintentionally. And so I don't think it's fair to say that it's targeted at people who are on kill lists. But then, the thing that bothers me about these kinds of statements from the Obama administration is that the administration is willing to make these kinds of defenses of the program through unofficial channels, through the media, for example, or through leaks to the media more often. But when we go into court and we demand that the administration provide the documents to back up those kinds of statements, the administration says, unbelievably, that they can't confirm or deny the existence of a CIA drone program. And so the administration kind of wants it both ways. They go into court, they insist that the drone program is a secret, but the next day they leak all of this information, obviously selected information, that paints the program in a favorable light. They leak all of that information to the media. But in the end, the public doesn't really have the ability to assess the real ramifications of this program, the civilian costs of the program, or even the scope of the authority that the administration is claiming, because the only information we get through unofficial channels or through leaks to the media from the administration. We don't get any of the real documents because the administration in court insists that the program is a secret. And I think that that's unsustainable. I'm hoping that a court will soon reject the administration's arguments about secrecy here. But
right.
I think it's a dangerous thing.
Yeah, well, in terms of the U.S. president's policy of using drones, he's under very little pressure to change the position. Let's look at this poll which was taken earlier this year. It was an ABC Washington Post poll. 83% of those surveyed said they either strongly or somewhat support Obama's use of drone strikes. Of those surveyed who identify themselves as liberal Democrats, 77% support drones. 92% of conservative Republicans back drones, and 79% of those backing the drones policy also approve of them being used in cases when those targeted are American citizens overseas. Morris Davis, there's no pressure at all on the president.
You know, we used to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we've become the constrained and the cowardly. I mean, for the last decade, we've let fear and fear-mongering dictate policy, and the American public has bought into it. I mean, those statistics that you cited, the American Red Cross did a survey last year where a majority of Americans said torture is okay. I mean, so the pendulum has swung. The fear-mongers carried the narrative. The president didn't stand up and tell the American public the truth, and we are where we are today.
PJ Crowley, constrained and cowardly. I mean, you know, does this practice of targeting people around the world without any kind of legal recourse, does it compromise the principles on which this country was founded? I mean, you know, the rule of law in America was considered to be paramount, unlike banana republics.
Well, again, we have to recognize that we are at war, you know, with a stateless organization. War is a horrible thing. I mean, I worry today about, as the president said earlier this week, the loose talk about going to war with Iran, and without understanding fully the ramifications of this. Now, I would say, in defense of what the president said, that we invaded Iraq in 2003, and among other things, more than 100,000 Iraqis were killed. If you say that we're conducting warlike operations, you know, in Yemen, Pakistan, Afghanistan with drones, and only 500 people were killed, that's a horrible thing. But on a scale, it is, as the president said, the much more focused use of force. But again, I think we all agree at this panel that where you're utilizing this incredible use of power, doing it unilaterally within the executive branch, there has to be a far more robust public discussion of the operations, their implications. There are legitimate concerns about secrecy, but in my mind, ensuring the political legitimacy of what is being done overrides any calculation of secrecy in this instance.
Jameel Jaffer, do you think this policy is going to be expanded? Because the president and the administration is under absolutely no pressure, as we can see from those opinion poll numbers.
You know, I actually don't think that poll tells us very much. Nobody or very few people out there categorically oppose the use of drones to carry out killings. There are circumstances in which the government has not just the authority, but the obligation to use lethal force. And you know, if I did a poll of my colleagues here at the ACLU, most people would say that. The question isn't whether the government ever has the authority to use lethal force. It does. The question is how broad that authority is. And that's not a question that was asked in that poll. I think it's very important that in this area the government's authority be narrowly limited and that it be overseen by the courts. And both of those things are things that the administration is resisting right now. I think in the long run, that's something that's very dangerous for this country. I think that, again, you know, people who trust the Obama administration should really think about whether they'll trust the next one too.
Okay, Morris Davis, I'm going to give you the last word on this. Is there any legal recourse here? I mean, who would oversee this? You know, who would call? call for accountability, the United Nations?
Well, as I said, it's killing another human being unless there's legal justifications, murder, but, fortunately for the U.S., we're the big kid on the playground, so who's going to hold us accountable?
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, folks. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And that is it from the Inside Story team in Washington, D.C. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching.